Yeah, I'm still wearing the t-shirt. It's not the next day though, it's the same day. So you can wear the same t-shirt twice on the same day. That's okay. Anyway, lecture four. What we're going to do, what we're kind of doing a little bit in week 8 is, playing off the vibe of your requests. I'm trying to organize some of this material according to, in a way, things that you might find as complete chapters in a full psychology course. So, for example, we just did the altered states of consciousness. There is typically a consciousness chapter. For the next 2 lectures, we're going to talk about issues that would be in what would be called a developmental psych chapter. So, I mean, just to give you a general, bigger picture of developmental psych, it's really focused on how the mind and how a human's interaction with the world develops in both the infant to adult stages. How do we actually grow to have the capabilities we have and the ability to think about the world as we do, and also more and more recently on the let's say the other side of the over the hill as people reach older adulthood, what sort of changes occur as they move into old age. So it's really about the transition or changes in mind, in cognitive abilities, at both the young and the older level. Now, we're not going to spend so much time talking about the older level, but I mean, just to give you a sense, issues like Alzheimer's disease, for example, and what's called normal dementia, just the normal tendency we all have to become forgetful. If any of you are older, especially if you're retired, you're probably forgetful mostly because you don't have to pay attention to things the way you used to when you were working and you had to pick up the kids after work and you had to remember to get X, Y, and Z at the groceries and pay this bill or that's going to be due. And when you're in the full throes of adulthood, your memory is kept constantly busy by all these things you have to remember. But once you retire, those pressures kind of leave, and your style of interacting with the world seems to change. Sometimes in some positive ways. Generally, older people become much more creative, and they enjoy aesthetics and beauty a lot more. But one of the costs are that they often have memory failures, memory problems. They don't encode information as well anymore. So it's a transition, it's a trade-off. All right, so that's a sense of the older side. All right, in the next 2 lectures, we are going to spend more time, though, focusing on the younger side of things. Partly because that's perhaps where our theories are most well developed. Plus, there's some really cool, interesting, neat examples. And I know a lot of you have children. Heck, some of you are children. I looked at the demographics the other day, and the number of under 14-year-olds in this class is surprising. It's very cool. Welcome. So we'll be talking a little bit about that younger stage of things. All right, and we're going to do it across 2 lectures. This first lecture is really going to focus on cognitive development. The next lecture will focus on the link between parent and child, what's sometimes called attachment. All right. So here we are, week 8, lecture 4, stages of development. All right, so the face of developmental psychology is this gentleman right here, Jean Piaget, a Frenchman, psychologist, educator. In fact, a lot of his work, a lot of his driving force, and I have great respect for him because of this, was about enhancing education. He really wanted to understand how we could better educate the masses. But that led him to developmental psychology because he came to the realization that children view the world differently than we do. And there seemed to be stages you could look at where the way they view the world changes in some systematic way. In fact, he had this notion that they have to reach a certain ability. There's a certain ability with each of these stages that they have to grasp, and until they grasp that, they can't reach the next level. And so that they're going through these distinct stages of development. And he felt you had to understand what stage a child was at in order to properly educate them. You could not just treat them like little adults. It just won't work because they don't think like little adults. So he spent a lot of his life describing these stages, but unlike, for example, a Sigmund Freud, he also tried to come up with very clear objective tests, and you're going to see some children doing some of these tests in the links that I give you at the end of this, and it's really kind of fascinating. It's really kind of cool. It's like we've seen all this, but we've never really appreciated what we were seeing, and Piaget really made us appreciate that. So Piaget ultimately felt there were 4 stages, and many of us remain in, it says 12 to 15, but hey, many of us are still in this final stage, so we will get to that. He had one stage which he called the sensory motor, ages birth to 2 years old, pre-operational from 2 to 7, concrete operational from 7 to 12, and then formal operational, which should just say 12 on. It shouldn't really have that 15-year-old boundary. Now he named these based on what he saw as the primary challenges that a child faces in these different ages. So let's just kind of go through these a little bit. Sensory motor. Piaget thought the main challenge facing an infant and up to a toddler is interacting with the world around it. I mean, literally from infancy, a child's vision is very poor. For example, one of the first things they have to learn, their system has to learn, is how to operate their pupils properly. As you know now, when bright lights are out, our pupils constrict and let less light in the eye. When it's darker, they dilate. I almost lost that word, letting more light in the eye. But that reflex is not a reflex from birth. The eye has to kind of learn how to do that. And before it does that, the child's vision is very blurry. As its whole optic tract is developing, its vision becomes sharper and sharper and sharper. So the sensory stuff is important. Obviously, sounds are very important. A child at birth knows its mother's voice. It already has a memory. It's heard the mother resonating through her body so often that it knows that voice and will orient to the mother right away. So it has auditory abilities, but those abilities also develop. And of course, slowly, as it starts to get its motor abilities developed, as a child learns to grasp and reach for things, and then eventually crawl towards things and walk towards things, it starts to explore the world. And so the claim is that in this stage, its priority is about learning about the world, the objects in it, and its ability to manipulate those objects. So, walking around a table to get to something. And so this is a very important stage. Now, what's some of the peculiarities of this stage are that the child in this stage really kind of views the world as what it sees, as what's around it. And so, actually, I think I have a slide on this, so we'll kind of walk through these. Maybe I'll bounce back to this one every now and then. One of the critical things it has to learn, and one of these critical tests it has to pass, according to Piaget, is the notion of object permanence, that when it understands object permanence, it's made a cognitive leap. What's that mean? Object permanence is, well, when you lack it, what that means is if you don't see it, it isn't there. Okay? The idea, kind of think of it this way, that when you're in a room and somebody leaves the room, you and I don't think that person who left the room has ceased to exist. We think they're just in the other room and they're going to come back. However, the child, when you leave its world, you're not in its world. Okay, it's like things do not have this permanency that we now, at our age, believe they have. Something only exists if the child can see it, smell it, touch it, etc. Now, in this slide, I'm showing the mother playing this peekaboo, peekaboo, oh, where'd I go, I'm not here, here I am, no I'm not, sorry, too many children in my life. But that idea is that simply by covering your face to the child, you have disappeared, you the person, there's a person still there, but the identity of that person is now gone. Oh, where's mommy? There she is. Oh, daddy, not mommy. There he is. Okay, daddies don't do these games very well. Now, there'd be some kind of interesting tests of object permanence. One of them is quite a simple one. You take a toy that a child really likes, and if you put that, this would be, okay, this child is very young, but when this child gets a little older and is able to grasp and reach and maybe even crawl a little bit for things, if you take a toy that they want and you just leave it out, the child will probably crawl after it and go after it. But sometimes if you take that toy, put it out somewhere and put a blanket over it, then the child is not drawn to it. Okay, as soon as you put the blanket over it, it's gone. Child isn't interested in it. It's only interested in the things it can see. And in fact, an important stage is when the child does go after it, even when you've covered it. So when the child shows you, oh no, I know it's there. Okay, it's there, it's just under that thing. It still exists. So they crawl towards it, they pull the blanket off, and they take the toy. At that point, we think they have grasped the concept of object permanence, and that kind of marks the end of the sensory motor stage. So that means they've kind of passed through that. They are now, if I go back, entering the pre-operational phase. So keep in mind, just like walking or anything, these years are just sort of rough boundaries. Different children reach them at different points. Now, if you think of this pre-operational, okay, what operational means when you think of it this way is your ability to manipulate, operate on something. And pre-operational means that kids can't really do that yet. I'm going to have to ask you to just kind of hold on to that for a second, because that'll make more sense once we talk about concrete operational and formal operational. So for now, just say pre-operational. They can't do this yet, but they're getting the building blocks for operating. And those building blocks are the notions of, symbolic representations, language, really. So as children hit around age 2, then the focus is less about learning to control their bodies and learning about the world. They now have a pretty good sense of what they can do. They're fully mobile. They can manipulate just about as richly as they want to manipulate. They have a pretty good understanding of objects in the world. Now is when they begin to learn language. Now think of what language is. It's a symbolic representation. So we can take something like this. Okay, and a child might understand what this is, might be able to use this. Imagine it's a crayon, might be able to draw with it. So when they see a crayon, they know what it is. But in order to be able to say, Mummy, crayon, to be able to ask for the crayon. Crayon? Trying to do my best 2-year-old. Crayon? I can't do a 2-year-old. But anyway, and be able to ask with it, you have to have associated that sound, crayon. What a weird sound now that I hear it, crayon. You have to have associated that sound with this, which would be wrong because this is actually a pen. But whatever, throw that away. That's what the child is beginning to learn. So it's all about verbal skills, but cognitively, when you think about what verbal skills is, it's mapping these arbitrary sounds and eventually scribbles, these shapes of lines, mapping those onto concepts, onto things the child has learned about in the sensory motor stage. So, it's seen ducks, it's seen dogs, it's seen crayons, it's seen chairs, but it just thought of them for what they were. Now it's learning that these things have these symbolic representations, and that's very important. Okay, so now let's take that and let's talk about conservation. So this is, when we talk about pre-operational, the idea is this child will know about, you can show pictures of things like this, like water, and it will know and understand things, but it has a real problem operating on those things. So here's a classic Piaget example. You take 2 little beakers of water and you show the child at first. See, they contain the same amount of water, right? And the child says, yes, I see that. I agree. They're equal amounts of water. Now we bring in this long, skinny container, and we take the water from this vessel and pour it into this one, right in front of the child's eyes. And we now say, of these two, which one has more water in it? And a child will almost always immediately, a child in this stage, 2 to 7 years old, will almost always immediately point to the tall one and say, that has more water. They're confusing the height of the water with the amount of the water. Okay, they have trouble doing those operations, those sort of math things. They fall back on very simplistic indicators, like how tall is the height of the water. Here's my favorite example of conservation. And those of you with young kids, this is an example I heard a psychologist give where he had ordered pizza, and he had two kids, one of them at this stage, let's say a 4-year-old girl, the other one older than that, let's say an 8-year-old. And the pizza had 3 left. There were 3 slices of pizza left. And one of the kids started to grab for 2, and the other one got all upset. You can't have 2. That's not fair, blah, 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 blah. And so what the psychologist, knowing his Piaget, did was go into the kitchen with the 3 slices, cut one of them into 2, come back out, give the younger child the 2 small slices, and the older child the 2 big slices, and said, there, now you both have 2. And the younger child was happy with that. And of course the older child was happy with that. The older child knew they were getting more pizza. The younger child knew they were getting 2 slices of pizza, as was the older child. And that was sort of the depth of their cognitive ability. Okay, so these children show that lack of conservation, but at some point they start to realize this. They start to realize that cutting a big slice of pizza into 2 slices of pizza does not make more pizza. And so they learn to do a lot of these math, these operations on things, okay? And that shows once they can do that, that they've entered this next stage, the stage we call the period of concrete operations. Now, concrete because they can do it with things like the pizza really well. But they have trouble if things get a little abstract, okay, if things get weird, and we all do. Yeah, I can come here. But let me hold off for a second. If it's a question of two pizzas versus 2 big pieces of pizza versus 2 small pieces of pizza, something they can see that clearly, then they're very good at it. But if it becomes, imagine a logic problem of a sort where we had cards laid out, and there's good examples of this one online, and I should have grabbed a copy of it. But an example where we say on one side of the card is an even or an odd digit, and on the other side of the card is a vowel or a consonant. And you see 2 of the cards say 2 and 7, and then another card says A and P. And you say, here's a rule. If it has a vowel on one side, then it must have an even number on the other. Which cards do you have to flip over to test that rule? When it's an arbitrary thing like that, children at this age have a really hard time dealing with those abstract kinds of concepts. If it has a vowel, then it has to be, I can't remember what I said. But when it's a very concrete thing, they can handle it. Okay, and so they reach that point of concrete operations. Now, there is something that's still very characteristic of that stage, and that's what I'm going to be talking about here, is that children in this concrete operational stage, they can do the operations, but another characteristic of their thinking is they tend to be very egocentric. Okay, very much still focused on, they see the world as they see the world. Okay, their perspective on things to them seems like the only perspective, and they have trouble understanding why other people can't see the world the way they do because they think that's the way the world is. Okay, they have trouble escaping this. So if they, this is often when a child will take things from other children just because they want them, and they always feel justified. They will cheat in sports, but they think it's okay when they cheat. They don't think it's okay when somebody else cheats. And so they have this real problem seeing the world through other people's eyes. And in fact, there are tests for that that are used to mark the transition from the concrete to the formal operational stage. And it's just things like this, very simple ones. So you place a child on one side of anything. Okay, here it's mountains. This is one of the things Piaget used. But in other ones, he would just have objects on a table laid out in various ways. And he would ask the child, first, tell me what you see. What's this look like from your perspective? And the child will virtually any child will be able to tell you that. But then you stick a doll on the other side and you ask the child, well, what does this look like from the doll's perspective? You're not allowed to move. You have to stay here. But tell me what the doll sees. Okay, this is a very difficult thing to do. And about age 12 is when children start to be able to do this. It's cognitively and socially a really important marker. It's when they begin to have this realization that everybody in the world sees the world a little differently. And they begin to have this ability that is clearly linked to empathy, theory of mind, other issues we've talked about, this ability to see the world through someone else's eyes. And that takes a long time to develop. That's sometimes the biggest source of frustration between parents and children, is that parents see this easily. They see the implications of the child's actions. And they say, don't you see that was hurtful to your sister? The child doesn't see it. Okay, and I mean, they'll believe you if you tell them that it was hurtful. They'll repeat it, blah, blah, blah. But in their mind, they cannot actually experience the events from the eyes of other people the way that you can. And that's why a child can seem mean or nasty or whatever, but they just have not yet developed that ability, and they don't until later on. So there are tests for that. That marks when they're going into the formal operations. All right, now I don't really have a thing about formal operations because it's kind of where we are. I'll go back to here for a second. But really, the formal operations period is where we start to get pretty good at dealing with even abstract transformations, abstract problems, abstract concepts. We can deal with things called love, justice, those weird word problems, like if it has a consonant on this side, it has a vowel on the other. Math. Okay, math itself, basic mathematical ability. How many of you have trouble with math? Math is doing these abstract calculations, especially on variables. Transform 2a equals 3x times 4b equals 7y. Multiply those together and give me another equation. And so this is all kind of abstract, weird stuff. And we tend to find it very difficult. But some of us get pretty good at it, and some not. And that's why I say it goes on for 15. That's the hardest thing for us to do. Even this, by the way, the perspective. I mean, we all get the basic ability, but I think some people get it much better than other people do. And so those processes continue. All right, I've just given you a few examples, and the reason I've just given you a few examples is these things are better seen than explained. And I was actually going to show them in the lecture, but that just seems kind of silly in a way. You can view these on your own, but I call it the Piaget channel. This is a YouTube channel, and it shows kids going through these various tests and their reactions to it. And it's very cool, very interesting, and this will bring home what I said much more clearly than what I said will bring home what I said. So check out those videos. You'll find them cool. You'll find them interesting. Those of you with children, go play with your children. Try some of these things out, see what they do. This is a documentary on Piaget himself. Piaget is a fascinating figure. A really multifaceted guy. That he gets most of the attention for this cognitive development stuff, but he's fascinating beyond that. By the way, the one knock against Piaget is some people think he was too conservative in terms of when children can reach the next stage, but most people believe the stages are pretty bang on. This is a little documentary I liked about Piaget, talking about Piaget, how he's misunderstood in some cases, his theories are, again, fascinating and always interesting to hear from the guy himself. And now this is just almost me feeling guilty. When you talk about child development, yes, Piaget is the figure, but not far behind him is Vygotsky. Vygotsky's kind of jumped off of Piaget's ideas and took them some really new directions. And I don't really have time for them in the MOOC, but I certainly would in a normal course. And I suggest you spend a bit of time learning a little bit about Vygotsky there. A decent blog post. This is, yeah, right. I do remember this. This is somebody's blog post. I don't know who it is. I think about 300 people have visited so far. So I always like throwing you guys at stuff like this. But this is him trying to explain some of these ideas and comparing Piaget to Vygotsky. So once you've looked at that, check out this blog post, and it should help bring it all together. This is also this weird what's called MindMeister comparison. I thought it was kind of interesting. So I threw it in there. It compares Piaget to Vygotsky on a couple of bases. So check that out. And that's it for Lecture 4. Now, Lecture 5, you parents, we're going to be talking about how psychologists measure the attachment between you and your children. Again, a controversial experiment, or a controversial procedure, really, by many people's opinions. And it's really associated with someone named Mary Ainsworth, a very well-known female psychologist that really contributed to the field. So we'll be talking about her, and we'll also be talking about what the optimal parenting style is. So a little bit more parenting next lecture in Lecture 5. See you for that one. Bye-bye.